Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in the studio with me is Jason Kander, the former Secretary of State of Missouri, former candidate for the Senate from Missouri, and the president of Let America Vote, perhaps most consequentially at this moment. Let America Vote, and the chair of the DNC's Commission to Protect American Democracy. Jason, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
And I should add, if you want to track down Jason and find out more information about what he's doing, go to letamericavote.org, and you can tweet him at Jason Kander. It's Kander. Jason, you were in New Hampshire this morning.
I was.
Tell me what happened.
So the president's, I think they call it the Election Integrity Commission. I refer to it as the Voter Suppression Committee to reelect the president, but it was having its most recent meeting up there. And so there was a big protest, and I was up there to speak. You know, you've got Secretary Chris Kobach from Kansas, who chairs the president's bogus.
Also runs the interstate cross-check thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's Mr. Voter Suppression. That's, I guess, what he's identified as his place in the world. And so he, just the other day, falsely claimed that there were thousands of cases of fraud in the election in New Hampshire. And then they had this meeting up there. And so we were up there to point out a couple of things. One, it's good to remind people that the original purpose, the reason that this commission came into being, is that the president of the United States told what I argue is the biggest lie that a sitting president has ever told, which is that 3 to 5 million illegal voters voted in the election, which we know is a complete and total lie. And then they had to put some theatrics together to try and sort of dress that up and make it look like the president didn't tell a giant lie. So they put this commission together. Well, that morphed into what they have now, which is just a continuing part of the Republican strategy to undermine faith in American democracy so that they can pass laws that make it harder to vote.
Yeah. Troy, if you can get, yes, please. This is not, you know, your theory that this started with Trump having lied is good. You know, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But this is not a new thing. I mean, back in 1981, Paul Weyrich was helping run the, well, in 1980, actually. He was helping run the Reagan campaign. He was a major Republican strategist. He was the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, a major player. And he was speaking to a group of Republican activists in a church in Dallas, Texas, and he said this.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
All right. So there you go.
I mean,
this is they've been doing this for a long. In fact, William Rehnquist, you know how he made his chops in the Republican Party? It was in Arizona in the late 50s and early 60s. He would go to the polling places where the Native Americans and the Hispanics showed up, and he was a huge guy. He was like 6'2", you know, big guy. And back then he was in his 30s. And he would go to those places and he would challenge voters in a loud voice. He was a lawyer, you know, and he'd say, yeah, prove to me. And to the point that they would just scatter, they'd run.
Yeah.
And not because they were illegal voters, but because they were just so intimidated by this giant guy. And that's how Rehnquist made his chops in the Republican Party. And that was like in the 50s.
Well, and the Weyrich audio that you just played is from the year before I was born. I mean, they've been doing this a while.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I'm now the former Secretary of State of Missouri, and that's from the year before I was born. And I've seen this up close and personal. Like, Missouri has a GOP supermajority in the legislature. I was the chief election official there for 4 years. And so they basically have a playbook that they run. And you know, step one in it is undermine faith in democracy. And then step two is you use that to create obstacles to voting. And then step three is you create obstacles to the obstacles. So what we're seeing with the commission is step one. What we're seeing with the numerous states around the country where they're proposing new laws, or even including in New Hampshire where I was this morning, that's step two and step three. That's how this works, and it's pretty transparent and pretty un-American.
Yeah. We have a friend who is just trying to get his driver's license, just trying to get ID, and he couldn't get his birth certificate from California because he couldn't get the form notarized, because the notaries here in Washington, D.C. have all been instructed not to notarize anything without government ID. And so here he is trying to get his birth certificate to get a government ID, and the notaries are saying, no, we won't fill out the form. It's like, and you know, the notaries have been informed, you know, don't do this for people. It's like, you know, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling.
It's obstacles to the obstacles, right?
Yeah.
If he were in a state that required that kind of ID, that'd be the obstacle, and then the obstacle to the obstacle is what you're talking about. So it's, you know, one of the best examples is a couple of years ago in Alabama, they passed a photo ID law, said, okay, you got to have a very specific form of ID that comes from the Alabama DMV in order to vote. Then they closed down the DMVs in the black parts of Alabama. Now, that was during the Obama administration, so they stepped in and they forced their hand and they undid a lot of that. But if they do that again in the Trump administration, there's no way it's going to go that way. I mean, Jeff Sessions has had the Department of Justice literally switch sides in the cases having to do with voting rights. I mean, the Department of Justice is now on the opposite side of folks who are fighting for their civil rights.
Right. What is the legal basis of this? I mean, you know, in Bush v. Gore, Rehnquist wrote, there is no affirmative right to vote for President of the United States in the Constitution. And of course, that's because of the Electoral College. But, and there have been people, we've had this conversation on the show many times, and people call in and go, but wait a minute, you know, the 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. That's a right to vote. The 14th Amendment gives, or 13th or 15th Amendment gives African Americans a right to vote, or at least black men a right to vote. That's a right to vote. Are there not affirmative rights to vote in the Constitution? And my response has always been the Supreme Court has not acknowledged that. But what am I missing here?
Well, so look, I'm a lawyer, but I don't do the legal side of this right now. So, I mean, I'd love to give you an answer, but there are people who can give you better answers about that. What I can tell you is what the Republicans are trying to do is find any little string that they can get it close enough to constitutional. And that alley to run down has just gotten a lot wider. You've got President Trump appointing the judges. And as I said, DOJ switching sides. The other thing to remember is that's not where things were going prior to the election. You have Judge Posner, who, you know, is generally considered one of the most respected folks in conservative judicial philosophy, who was on the appellate court that ruled on the first voter ID law, the Indiana law. He wrote in his book that it's the biggest mistake he ever made, you know, and so that's the direction things were going, and it obviously changed with this election. So, you know, you mentioned Let America Vote. I started it in February because traditionally what those of us who advocate for voting rights have done is gone to court and won more often than not always, but usually won. But that usually happens after the fact. The damage from the law has already taken place in an election. But the other thing is, when you have President Trump win, and now he's picking the judges, and Jeff Sessions is switching sides in the legal cases, what it meant to me was that the period of time in which we could rely pretty much exclusively on the court of law to fight this, that was over. And now there's a huge urgency to, in my opinion, expand into the court of public opinion. The legal challenges are still really important, but now we have to actually fight this politically as well. And so that's what Let America Vote is. It's the first organization dedicated to creating political consequences for politicians who commit voter suppression.
That is great. And you started the organization?
Yeah, we started back in February. We've been around, you know, a few months now. We've got 65,000 folks nationwide signed up to volunteer, raised a couple $1 million, and have been really active right now since the elections in Virginia or this November. We've had people on the ground in Virginia. We do boots on the ground is really what we do. And in the last 2 months, we've knocked 135,000 doors in Virginia, focused on mostly, I mean, the governor's race, because obviously the veto matters a lot for voter suppression bills, but also a handful of state legislative races where there are Republicans who I believe are very beatable and also voted the wrong way on voter suppression. I want Republican elected officials around the country to understand that there's no longer a consequence-free exercise. You know, you can choose if you want to make it harder to vote, but we're going to make it a lot harder for you to get reelected. And we're expanding to 5 states in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that voter suppression has been part of the American political scene literally from the founding of our country.
Yes.
And we like to think that there was this halcyon period where, you know, everybody could vote, but I don't think that ever existed. There has always been resistance to people voting. Do we need a constitutional amendment? Do we need, is this something that Congress could pass at law to provide an affirmative right to vote?
Well, first of all,
or is that the ask another lawyer question?
No, this one I got. Look, Congress needs to actually act on, I mean, look, the decision that the Supreme Court made regarding the Voting Rights Act was, I think, a big mistake, and it shouldn't have happened. But what they did is they kicked it to Congress. And in the past, when Congress has reauthorized the Voting Rights Act, it has happened without a great deal of fanfare. It's just something that they did because...
Well, the last time it was reauthorized, it was like 98 votes in the Senate.
Right, because American history has ruled on this. I mean, you know, this was not something that was a controversial idea, right? At least not anymore. Obviously, in its inception, it was. So, first of all, they need to act on that. And the fact that they haven't demonstrates that this Republican Congress... Look, it's all part. There's a reason that when Donald Trump said that millions of people voted illegally, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell didn't say, well, yeah, that's a lie. Because it went right into their strategy, right? Undermine faith in democracy so that you can create these obstacles. What they want, I mean, this is the core of his reelection strategy for 2020, President Trump. It is, if you can make every state's voting laws look like Wisconsin's, he cannot be beat.
That's right.
That's what this is all about. And so, there are things Congress could do, but what we need to do is we need to make sure that state by state, where these obstacles are put into place, that folks have to answer for them. I mean, when you see Republicans from vulnerable districts, whether it's state legislative or whatever, oftentimes when they break with their party, it's on issues where they know that there is an organized opposition, right? On the environment, for instance, or perhaps they'll stand with labor against their party because they know that there's an organized force that will show up against them in their next election. Well, that didn't exist until February when it came to voting rights. And that's what we're doing. We're making sure that they understand you can make the choice to do this if you want, but you may not be back here at the next legislative session because we're going to show up and beat you.
We're talking to Jason Kander, the former Secretary of State of Missouri, the president and founder of Let America Vote. LetAmericaVote.org is the website. You can tweet him at Jason Kander, Kander. Jason, we have a little less than a minute left. What would you like people who are listening or watching us right now to do?
Thanks. They can go to LetAmericaVote.org. They can contribute. They can sign up to volunteer. There are 5 states where we are opening field offices in 2018.
What are those states?
Nevada, Tennessee, Georgia, New Hampshire, Iowa, all states where there's been, real voter suppression issues. So if you're in those states, certainly contact us. But if you're not, contact us anyway. Fill out the volunteer form because we're going to be coming out soon with some ways for folks around the country to help. Not just, giving money is also helpful, but not just giving money, but other ways to help as well.
Marvelous stuff. Jason Kander, check out LetAmericaVote.org is the website. You can tweet him at Jason Kander. Also, you can tweet at LetAmericaVote. Jason,
thanks so much. Appreciate it.